Millionaire bans black boy from his mall, but bitterly regrets it. Richard Harrison surveyed his empire of glass and marble with pride as he walked through the gleaming corridors of Riverside Mall, the most luxurious in New York City. Nothing escaped his piercing blue eyes, always alert to any detail that might tarnish the impeccable image he had built over 2 decades. That's when he spotted the boy. Small, black, no older than 9, he walked timidly across the Italian marble floor with a worn cloth bag in his hands. His faded jeans and tattered beige jacket stood in stark contrast to the refined surroundings, where customers with designer handbags and tailored suits moved with the confidence of those who belonged to an exclusive world. "Hey, kid!" Richard's voice echoed through the hallway, making several people stop to watch the scene. "What do you think you're doing here?" The boy froze, his eyes wide with surprise and fear. I just wanted to—" Richard strode forward, his navy blue suit impeccably fitted, his white shirt contrasting with his tanned skin, the kind earned at the city's finest clubs. "This isn't the place for you. We don't allow beggars or street vendors here," he declared, pointing an accusing finger toward the exit. "Security! But sir, I just came to deliver something that—" "I don't care. People like you scare away my customers," Richard cut in, as 2 security guards quickly approached. "Escort this young man to the exit and reinforce the instructions at the doors. I don't want this kind of person in my mall." The boy's eyes welled with tears, but he held on to his dignity, clutching the cloth bag to his chest. "Come. Son, kid," one of the guards said, placing a hand on his shoulder. What Richard didn't notice was Margaret Wilson, a 68-year-old woman watching the scene with growing outrage as she discreetly recorded everything on her phone. A retired history teacher, she never missed a chance to document the injustices she witnessed. Back in her Upper East Side apartment, Margaret sent the video to her niece Jennifer Wilson, a reporter for Metro News. "Jennifer, you need to see this. It happened today at Riverside Mall. It's appalling." 24 hours later, Richard Harrison was locked in his office on the mall's top floor, watching in horror as the video went viral across all social media. On the TV screen, Jennifer Wilson narrated with indignation. Footage shows businessman Richard Harrison, owner of Riverside Mall, forcibly removing a black boy, just 9 years old, from the premises using prejudiced language. The incident has sparked outrage online, with hundreds already mobilizing for a protest outside the mall. Richard turned off the TV and ran his hands through his perfectly styled hair. The pressure in his chest grew with each passing second. "How did this happen?" he muttered, more to himself than to Sarah Miller, his visibly tense PR assistant who remained silent. "I need to put out this fire immediately." "I've drafted an official statement, Richard," Sarah said, handing him a sheet of paper. "But, honestly, we need more than that. We need to find that boy." "What for?" Richard asked, scanning the document. "For a formal apology, maybe some kind of compensation." Across town in Brownsville, Tyler Johnson sat at the small kitchen table in the home he shared with his grandmother, Grandma Betty. The boy pushed his food around listlessly, still shaken by the humiliation from the day before. "You haven't even touched your beans, child," Grandma Betty observed. The 72-year-old woman's dark skin bore the marks of time, her hands calloused from decades of work as a seamstress. "Still thinking about that rude man?" Tyler nodded without lifting his eyes from his plate. "He didn't even let me explain. Grandma, I just wanted to return that wallet I found on the sidewalk in front of the mall. It had IDs, money, even a ring inside." Grandma Betty sighed, sitting beside her grandson. "Some people judge by what they see on the outside, without looking at the heart," she said, running her hand through the boy's curly hair. "But you did the right thing, and that's what matters. Tomorrow, we'll go to the police station to turn in that wallet." Grandma Betty looked at her grandson tenderly. Since her daughter's untimely passing, Tyler had become more withdrawn, more serious for his age. It was as if he'd taken on an invisible responsibility to care for his grandmother, to somehow make up for the absence left behind. So many times she'd found him awake late at night, sketching by the dim light of the lamp, drawing houses and places. He said, "One day, I'll build these for you to live better, Grandma." You know what your mother used to say. Grandma Betty remarked, feeling that familiar ache in her chest whenever she spoke of her daughter. She said you were born with a special light, that you could see beauty where others only saw problems. Tyler's eyes glistened with held-back tears. I miss her, Grandma. Me too, my boy. Me too. Grandma Betty took a deep breath, discreetly, wiping the corner of her eye. But she'd be proud to see the young man you're becoming. We don't need to go to the police station anymore, Grandma. Tyler finally looked up. A lady from the mall came by while you were sewing. She recognized me from the video online and said the owner's looking for the wallet. Grandma Betty stiffened immediately. What video? What's this about? Her expression hardened as Tyler explained the incident at the mall and how a woman had recorded everything on her phone. As her grandson recounted the details of the humiliation he'd endured, Grandma Betty's wrinkled hands slowly clenched, her knuckles whitening from the pressure. Why didn't you tell me this before, boy? She asked, her voice low and controlled but brimming with anger. I didn't want to worry you, Grandma, Tyler replied, avoiding her gaze. You already have enough to worry about. Grandma Betty closed her eyes for a moment, a wave of guilt washing over her. Was this what her grandson carried on his shoulders? The weight of protecting her, even when he was the one who needed protection. Tyler, she began, cupping the boy's face in her calloused hands, you never ever hide something like this from me again. Do you understand? We're in this life together. Your pain is my pain. Tyler nodded, his eyes shining with restrained emotion. That man, that mall owner, Grandma Betty continued, her voice now trembling with anger. He has no right to treat anyone like that, least of all a child. If he comes here... Before Tyler could explain, firm knocks sounded at the front door. Grandma Betty rose with difficulty, leaning on the table, her aging body protesting the sudden movement. But her spine was straight, ready for confrontation. Who could it be at this hour? When she opened the door, she was met with an elegant woman in her mid-30s dressed in an impeccable pantsuit. Good evening. My name is Sarah Miller, assistant to Mr. Richard Harrison, owner of Riverside Mall. She introduced herself with a rehearsed smile. I'm looking for young Tyler and his guardian. Grandma Betty's eyes narrowed with suspicion. I'm his grandmother. What do you want with my grandson? Mr. Harrison would like to invite you both to a meeting tomorrow at the mall. He wishes to apologize in person for the unfortunate misunderstanding and, of course, to thank young Tyler for his honesty in trying to return the lost wallet. Grandma Betty crossed her arms. Misunderstanding. Is that what he called publicly humiliating a child? Sarah maintained her diplomatic smile, though visibly uncomfortable. Mr. Harrison is deeply sorry and would like to properly compensate you for the trouble. Compensate? With money. Grandma Betty shook her head. We're not interested. Grandma. Tyler appeared beside his grandmother, his eyes shining with curiosity. Can we at least hear what he has to say? Grandma Betty looked at her grandson, recognizing in him the same kindness she had always admired in her late son, Tyler's. Father. After a few seconds of thought, she turned back to Sarah. Tell your boss we'll go, but we're not interested in money. I want him to spend an entire day with my grandson, getting to know our life, our neighborhood, our struggles. I want him to see who we really are, these people he thinks scare away his customers. Sarah blinked several times, clearly caught off guard. I'm not sure if Mr. Harrison could... Those are my terms, Grandma Betty interrupted firmly. A full day, no driver, no bodyguards, no assistants, just him and my grandson. After that, I'll consider the matter closed. In his luxurious penthouse on the Upper West Side, Richard nearly choked on his whiskey when Sarah relayed Grandma Betty's conditions. She wants what? Me to spend a whole day in Brownsville, following a 9-year-old boy? That's absurd. Richard hurled his whiskey glass against the wall, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. The amber liquid slowly dripped, staining the imported Italian wallpaper. Who does this? This seamstress thinks she is, dictating terms to me, he continued, running his hands through his perfectly styled hair, mussing it for the first time in years. Sarah remained impassive, accustomed to her boss's outbursts. She had worked for Richard Harrison for 6 years, long enough to know every shade of his explosive temper. She knew that beneath the anger lay something deeper. Fear. Fear of losing control, fear of vulnerability, fear of facing the consequences of his actions. "Richard," she finally said, using a more personal tone than usual, "have you ever stopped to think that maybe, just maybe, this woman is offering you an opportunity?" "Opportunity?" He laughed bitterly. "To get robbed? To be humiliated? To grow," Sarah interrupted, with a courage that surprised them both. "To see beyond the bubble you live in." Richard stared at her, momentarily speechless. "I tried to negotiate, but she was firm," Sarah continued, seizing the moment of silence. "And honestly, Richard, the situation is getting worse. The video has over 2 million views, 3 brands cancelled contracts with the mall today, and the protest scheduled for tomorrow already has nearly 5,000 confirmations. The hashtag #ChangeRacistMall has been trending since yesterday." She walked to the window, taking in the panoramic view of the city. "Social media is on fire. People are sharing similar stories of discrimination they've faced at the mall. An influencer, with over 10 million followers, is organizing a boycott. The mayor just issued a statement condemning the shameful incident of racial discrimination at one of the city's premier shopping centers." Richard sank heavily into his leather chair, the full weight of the situation finally hitting him. He dragged a hand down his face, feeling the pressure bearing down on his shoulders. At 45, he had built a business empire that included 3 luxury malls, but he had never faced a PR crisis of this magnitude. How long would this outing last? One day from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. And after that, the matter would be closed? "According to you, yes. And Richard—" Sarah hesitated for a moment. "I really think we should accept. How a PR team agrees we need a more humanized approach, not just a cold statement or a donation to some institution." Richard walked to the window of his apartment, taking in the privileged view of the city. Below, the lights of New York City sparkled, like earthly stars, some brighter than others, reflecting the deep inequalities of the metropolis he knew so well, or at least thought he did. "All right," he finally said, turning back to Sarah, "but just one day and you'll arrange every detail to ensure my safety." The next morning at 7:45, Richard parked his Cadillac at the entrance of Brownsville, feeling completely out of place. He wore jeans and a polo shirt, the most casual clothes he could find in his closet, yet still clearly too expensive for the surroundings. As he stepped out of the car, he ignored the curious glances of residents passing by on their way to work. Following the GPS instructions, he walked through narrow alleys until he reached Grandma Betty's house. Before he could knock, the door opened. "Punctual. At least that," Grandma Betty remarked, sizing him up from head to toe. "Come in, Tylers. Finishing breakfast?" Richard stepped in hesitantly, immediately struck by the cleanliness and order of the small space. The living room, which also served as Grandma Betty's workspace, held an old sewing machine and neatly arranged fabrics. Family photos in simple frames adorned the walls. Tyler appeared from the kitchen, wearing the same jeans and beige jacket as the day before. His eyes met Richard's with a mix of caution and curiosity. "Good morning, sir," he greeted politely. "Good morning." "Tyler, right?" Richard replied, feeling oddly nervous. "You can call me Richard." Grandma Betty watched the interaction closely. "Tyler, show Mr. Richard your daily routine. And you," she turned to the businessman, "try to learn something today. I'll be here when you get back." Richard nodded, surprised by the natural authority of the elderly woman. As they left the house, Tyler began guiding him through the streets of Brownsville. Their first stop was a local bakery where the boy was clearly a regular. "Morning, Mr. Dave." "The usual, please," Tyler requested, placing a few coins on the counter. "Hey there, champ," replied the baker, a portly man with a graying beard, as he wrapped 2 loaves of bread. His eyes flickered to Richard with obvious curiosity. "And your friend?" "He's with me today," Tyler explained simply, taking the package and tucking it into his cloth bag. Leaving the bakery, they continued walking as Richard tried to keep the conversation going. "So, you come here every day?" "Yes, sir. I buy bread for Mrs. Grace, our neighbor. She has arthritis and can't leave the house on her own," Richard frowned, confused. You work for her? Tyler looked at him with genuine surprise. No, sir. I just help. She was friends with my mum. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us, who are just starting out. Now, back to the story. They continued to a small square where Tyler stopped to give one of the loaves to an elderly man sitting on a bench. Richard watched from a distance, noticing the respect with which the boy treated the old man and how the man smiled gratefully in return. Who is he? Richard asked when Tyler returned. Old Man Joe. He used to be a teacher but lost his home after retiring. Now he lives with his son but likes to spend his days here in the square. Richard swallowed hard, suddenly aware of how many different realities coexisted in the city he thought he knew so well. The next stop was a public school. It was Saturday, but several children were gathered in the outdoor courtyard. Hope Foundation, explained Tyler, waving to some friends. I come here on Saturdays for tutoring and activities. A woman around 40 years old, with curly hair tied in a bun, approached with a warm smile. Tyler, I thought you weren't coming today. Her gaze fell on Richard and her smile faltered slightly. Good morning. Good morning, Richard replied, feeling uncomfortable under the woman's assessing look. This is Mr. Richard, Ms. Thompson. He's with me today, Tyler explained, sparing Richard further details. I see. She seemed intrigued but asked no questions. Tyler, today we'll continue with the model project. Did you bring the materials you collected? The boy nodded, opening his cloth bag to show small pieces of cardboard, popsicle sticks, and other recycled items. Excellent, the teacher approved. Your group is already inside. Entering the classroom, Richard was surprised by the energy and creativity in the air. About 15 children worked in groups, building neighborhood models from recycled materials. Tyler joined a group of 4 kids working on a detailed representation of what looked like an improved version of Brownsville, with green spaces, well-planned buildings, and community areas. This is our idea for the neighborhood's future, Tyler explained, noticing Richard's interest. I drew the plans and we're building it together. Richard moved closer to examine their work. The drawings were surprisingly sophisticated for a child his age, with near-professional perspective and proportions. You drew this? He asked, genuinely impressed. Tyler nodded, a faint blush appearing on his cheeks. I want to be an architect. When I grow up, I want to build better homes for people here. Ms. Thompson, who had been watching the interaction, approached. Tyler has a natural talent. We've talked about scholarships for when he's older, but... She hesitated, giving Richard a meaningful look. Opportunities are limited for kids from communities like this, unfortunately. Richard felt the weight of her words, recognizing in them a veiled critique not just of society, but of people like him, who built invisible barriers between different worlds within the same city. They spent 2 hours at the school, with Richard, surprisingly absorbed in the activities, even helping Tyler and his friends with suggestions for the model. When they left, the businessman seemed less tense, almost relaxed. Where to next? He asked, now fully engaged in the adventure. Now I'll make my deliveries, Tyler replied, leading him down another alley. At a small hardware store, Tyler greeted the owner, a middle-aged black man named Marcus. Hi, Tyler. Ready to work? Yes, Mr. Marcus. This is Mr. Richard. He's with me today. Marcus raised an eyebrow at Richard but remained professional. Pleasure. Tyler's our best delivery boy, you know. Never late, never complains. Richard nodded, increasingly intrigued by this boy who seemed to know and be loved by the entire community. For the next 2 hours, he followed Tyler as the boy made small deliveries around the neighborhood. He carried bags of cement, nails, and tools, enduring the scorching sun with unwavering determination. Richard, accustomed to the comfort of air-conditioned offices and luxury cars, was soon sweating and out of breath. How do you do this every day? He asked at one point, pausing briefly in the shade. Tyler shrugged. Gotta do it. My grandma does what she can with sewing, but the money isn't always enough. Ever since my mom. He stopped, his eyes suddenly moist. Richard felt something tighten in his chest. It was the first time the boy had mentioned his mother, and the emotion in his eyes said it all. "What happened to her?" he asked gently. Tyler took a deep breath before answering. She was a cleaner in luxury buildings. She had a heart problem 2 years ago, but the doctors didn't catch it in time because she didn't want to miss work for tests. By the time she finally went to the hospital, it was too late. Richard fell silent, a wave of shame and guilt washing over him. How many people like Tyler's mother worked in his developments? How many similar stories were behind the anonymous faces that cleaned his malls, served his clients, ensured his comfort? By noon, they returned to Grandma Betty's house for lunch. Richard was exhausted, but strangely fulfilled. The experience had been eye-opening and uncomfortable, like a mirror being held up to him after years of avoiding his own reflection. Grandma Betty had prepared a simple but delicious meal: rice, beans, stewed chicken, and fresh salad. "I hope you don't mind. Our modest food, Mr. Harrison," she said, with a subtle touch of irony in her voice. "On the contrary," Richard replied sincerely, "it smells wonderful." As they sat at the table, Richard noticed Tyler didn't start eating right away. Instead, the boy bowed his head for a moment in silent prayer. The businessman watched, moved by that simple gesture of gratitude. The meal passed with surprisingly pleasant conversation. Grandma Betty, despite her initially guarded demeanor, proved to be a wise and good-humored woman. She shared stories about her youth, her years as a seamstress for some of the wealthiest families in New York City, and how she'd raised her son alone after her husband left. "And now I'm raising Tyler," she concluded, looking lovingly at her grandson. "He's my strength and my joy." Richard ate with an appetite that surprised even himself. For some reason, that simple food tasted better than many meals at high-end restaurants. As they finished eating, his eyes were drawn to the napkin Grandma Betty was using. It had a peculiar embroidery with a pattern of blue flowers that looked strangely familiar. "This embroidery," he remarked, pointing to the napkin. "It's very beautiful and familiar." Grandma Betty's face lit up. "Oh, this is my signature stitch, as I used to call it. I made many like this for the Dawson family back in the 80s. Mrs. Dawson loved this pattern, said it matched the decor of their beach house in the Hamptons." Richard felt his blood run cold. "The Dawson family? William Dawson's?" "Grandma." Betty nodded, her eyes now curious. "Yes, the businessman. You know him." "He—" Richard hesitated, a lump forming in his throat. "He was my father." A heavy silence fell over the table. Grandma Betty studied him with a new look, as if trying to find traces of William Dawson in the man sitting at her table. "So you're William's son," she finally said, her voice a mix of surprise and something deeper, almost painful. "Small world." "You worked for my family?" Richard asked, still processing the coincidence. "For 15 years, Grandma Betty confirmed, until the day your father decided to expand his business." Something in her tone made Richard uneasy. "What do you mean?" Grandma Betty slowly stood, walked to a small shelf, and took out an old photo album. She returned to the table and opened it to a specific page. "Look, Mr. Harrison, do you recognize this place?" Richard stared at the faded photograph. It showed a small village of simple but well-kept houses with children playing on a tree-lined street. In the background, the distant outline of New York City's downtown skyscrapers could be seen. "Should I recognize this?" "This was Hope Gardens," explained Grandma Betty, her wrinkled finger tracing the image with nostalgia. "A small but tight-knit community. We lived there for 3 generations. I was born in that house," she pointed to a modest corner building. "Your father bought the entire lot in 1995. Richard felt a chill run down his spine. He was starting to understand. "To build the Riverside Mall," Grandma Betty finished. "His first big project, wasn't it? Dozens of families were displaced. Some got minimal compensation. Others, like mine, fought in court for years with no luck. We ended up moving here to Brownsville." Richard felt as if the ground had opened beneath him. His father had always described the purchase of that land as a clean and fair deal, a golden opportunity in an underutilized part of the city. "I didn't know," he murmured, realizing how hollow that justification sounded. "Of course." "You didn't?" Grandma Betty replied without hostility, just a deep, weary resignation. "Why would you? People like us are invisible to people like you, until something like what happened to Tyler forces you to see us." Tyler watched the conversation in silence, his eyes shifting between them, absorbing everything with the sharp awareness of a child who grew up having to understand adults to survive. "I'm so sorry," Richard finally said, the words feeling too small for the weight of the revelation. Grandma Betty closed the album carefully. "I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty, Mr. Harrison. The past is the past. I'm telling you so you understand that our lives are connected in ways we can't even imagine, and that your actions, just like your father's, have real consequences on real people's lives." Meanwhile, at the Riverside Mall, Richard's prolonged absence was starting to raise concerns among the executives. News of the viral video kept spreading, and the protest in front of the mall grew stronger by the hour. In the spacious meeting room on the top floor, with its panoramic view of the city, the atmosphere was palpably tense. The 5 directors of the Harrison conglomerate were arguing heatedly, divided between those who saw the crisis as an opportunity for change and those who feared for the future of the business. "This is an unprecedented disaster," lamented Rebecca Taylor, the marketing director, showing social media numbers on her tablet. "We're losing about 1,000 followers an hour. Online ratings have dropped from 4.8 to 2.3 stars in less than 24 hours. We need to do something drastic." "Something drastic would be temporarily removing Richard," suggested Brian Parker, the youngest director, recently promoted to head of innovation. "A temporary leave while we handle—" "That's out of the question," interrupted Michael Dawson, slamming his hand on the table. "Richard is the face of this company. I suggest we stop panicking and wait for his return. He's always known how to handle crises. Not a crisis of this magnitude," considered Edward Thompson, the financial director, adjusting his thin-framed glasses. "I've tried calling him 6 times. It goes straight to voicemail." "This is getting ridiculous," commented Michael Dawson, Richard's cousin and head of operations. "Is he really spending the whole day in Brownsville? That place is dangerous." Sarah, who had been in occasional contact with Richard through messages, tried to calm things down. "It was an agreement, Michael. Richard knows what he's doing." "An agreement? With a seamstress and some kid?" Michael shook his head in disbelief. "I'm sending a security team to pick him up. This has gone too far." "I don't think this is a good idea," Sarah began, but Michael was already on the phone giving orders to the head of security. Back in Brownsville, Richard and Tyler had gone out again after lunch. The boy had taken him to a small shed that served as the headquarters for a community project. "This is where I keep the supplies I collect for the other kids," Tyler explained, opening the door to the simple but organized space. Richard stared in amazement at the shelves neatly stocked with notebooks, pencils, erasers, and other basic school supplies. "You collect all this?" "Some of it I buy with the money from my deliveries," Tyler explained as he showed him around. "The rest comes from donations. A lot of people here help however they can." In one corner, Richard noticed dozens of drawings hanging on makeshift clotheslines. He moved closer to get a better look. "These are plans," Tyler said proudly. "Ideas to improve the neighborhood. This one is a community center that could be built on that empty lot near the entrance. And this is a rainwater collection system for the hills to prevent landslides during storms." Richard studied the drawings with growing admiration. They were impressively detailed and practical, showing an intuitive understanding of space and functionality that many trained architects would take years to develop. "This is extraordinary, Tyler. You have a gift." The boy smiled shyly, clearly pleased by the praise. "Thank you. I study a lot on my own. The internet helps a lot when we have service." Richard thought of his son Brandon, the same age as Tyler, with access to international schools, private tutors, and every technological resource money could buy. Yet he had never seen in him the same passion and determination he saw in this boy from Brownsville. Suddenly, shouts and commotion outside interrupted his thoughts. Tyler ran to the door, followed by Richard. 3 black SUVs had parked in front of the shed, and men in suits stepped out with tense expressions. Richard immediately recognized the security team from Riverside Mall. "Mr. Harrison," one of them called, approaching quickly. "We've come to get you. There are concerns about your safety." Richard felt a wave of irritation and shame. "Who authorized this?" he asked, keeping his voice low but firm. "Mr. Michael Dawson, sir." "He's worried about—" "I'm perfectly fine," Richard interrupted, noticing the frightened looks from the residents gathering to watch. Tyler had subtly positioned himself in front of Richard, as if to protect him, a gesture the businessman didn't miss. "Please get in the vehicles and let's go," the security guard insisted. "This area isn't safe." "Not safe?" Richard finally raised his voice, frustration taking over. "I've spent the entire day here and have been treated with more dignity and respect than I often get in my own office." The people around them stopped to watch, surprised by the wealthy man's outburst. "Return to the mall immediately," Richard continued, staring down the guards. "That's a direct order. I'm here voluntarily and I'll leave when I've finished my business." The guards hesitated, clearly confused. "Sir, we have strict instructions, and I'm giving you different ones. I'm still the CEO, aren't I?" After a tense moment, the team leader signaled to the others, and they reluctantly returned to the vehicles. Before leaving, he gave Richard one last worried look. "If you need anything, sir—" "I'll be fine," Richard assured him, already. Turning back to join Tyler, as the SUVs drove away, he realized a small crowd had gathered, watching. He felt exposed and vulnerable in a way he had never experienced before. "So, did you notice Tyler's look? A mix of surprise and something that seemed like admiration." "You sent your bodyguards away," the boy remarked, sounding impressed. "We don't need them," Richard replied, surprised by his own certainty. "Shall we continue our day?" The next few hours flowed in a surprisingly pleasant way. Tyler took him to explore other aspects of the community, a community garden tended by elderly folks, a small makeshift library in a refurbished shipping container, a soccer field where barefoot children played with infectious skill and joy. By around 4 in the afternoon, dark clouds began covering the sky, signaling an approaching storm. Richard checked his watch, realizing that under normal circumstances, he'd already be eager to end this experience. Yet, he was surprised to find he wasn't in any hurry. "I think we should head back to Grandma's," Tyler suggested, glancing worriedly at the sky. "When it rains hard, the lower parts of the neighborhood flood fast." They hurried toward Grandma Betty's house when the first heavy drops began to fall. Within minutes, they were caught in a downpour. Turning a corner, they came across an alarming sight. Brown water rushed swiftly down the narrow alley, already ankle-deep. A few doors down, an elderly woman was desperately trying to stack sandbags at her doorstep. "Mrs. Jenkins!" Tyler shouted, running toward her without hesitation, with Richard right behind him. "The water's coming in, Tyler," the woman exclaimed, visibly distressed. "All my medicine, my things—" Without a second thought, Richard rolled up the sleeves of his expensive shirt and began helping with the sandbags. The rain poured mercilessly, soaking him completely, but for the first time in a long while he didn't care about his appearance. "We need more bags," he called to Tyler, who nodded and ran to get reinforcements. Within minutes, other neighbors joined them. Richard worked side by side with people he would have considered worlds apart just that morning. His drenched suit, muddy hands, and labored breathing, it all felt strangely freeing. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us newcomers. Now continuing. After nearly an hour of hard work, they managed to hold back the worst. The rain had eased to a steady drizzle, and Richard, exhausted, sat on a step beside Tyler. "Thank you for your help, young man," Mrs. Jenkins said, approaching with a clean towel she handed to Richard. "I don't even know who you are, but God bless you." Richard accepted the towel with a tired smile. "No need to thank me." "He's Tyler's friend," someone explained, and Richard realized, oddly enough, that description pleased him more than CEO or successful businessman. When they finally returned to Grandma Betty's house, it was nearly dark. The old woman waited at the door, clearly worried. "Goodness, you're soaked. Come in quick before you catch pneumonia." Richard was almost unrecognizable, muddy, hair disheveled, clothes completely ruined. Yet there was something different in his expression, a calmness that hadn't been there that morning. While Tyler went to shower, Grandma Betty offered Richard a change of clothes that had belonged to her late son. "They're not fancy like yours, but they're clean and dry," she said, handing him a simple pair of jeans and a button-up shirt. "They're perfect, thank you," Richard replied sincerely. In the small bathroom, Richard stared at his reflection in the mirror. Who was this man looking back at him? In the borrowed clothes, he seemed like a different person. Perhaps, he thought, he was finally seeing his true self, without the layers of privilege and arrogance he had cultivated for so long. When he left the bathroom, he found Grandma Betty preparing coffee. "I think we should call it a day," she said, pointing to the rain that had started falling heavily again. "It's already past 6, and the agreement was until 6. Richard nodded, a strange reluctance taking hold of him. For some reason he didn't fully understand. He didn't want that day to end. "It was a transformative experience," he finally said, accepting the cup of coffee she offered. "Thank you for that." Grandma Betty studied him for a moment, as if assessing the sincerity of his words. "And what did you learn today, Mr. Harrison?" Richard reflected before answering. "I learned that I've lived in a bubble for far too long. I learned that there's a whole world I chose to ignore because it was convenient. I learned that—" He hesitated, searching for the right words. "That maybe I've been wrong about a lot of things." Grandma Betty nodded, seemingly satisfied with the answer. Tyler returned to the living room wearing dry clothes, his hair still damp from the shower. He smiled shyly at Richard. "Are you leaving now?" "Yes, it's time," Richard replied, surprised by how sad the idea made him feel. "It was nice meeting you," Tyler said with childish honesty. "You're different than I thought." "You're different than I thought too, Tyler," Richard smiled. "Much better, actually." Before leaving, Richard hesitated at the door. There was something he needed to say. "Grandma Betty, Tyler, I want to make it up to you somehow, and I'm not talking about money." "We don't need anything, Grandma," Betty began, but Richard raised a hand gently. "Please let me finish. Tyler has an extraordinary talent. He deserves the chance to develop it. I'd like to offer him a full scholarship to the best school in New York City, with a specialized program for young architects." Grandma Betty and Tyler exchanged surprised glances. "And more," Richard continued. "I'd like to start a program for talented young people from communities like Brownsville, offering education and mentorship. With your permission, I'd like the program to bear your son's name, Grandma Betty, as a small way to make amends for what my family did to yours." Silent tears rolled down Grandma Betty's wrinkled face. "Are you serious?" "I've never been more serious in my life," Richard assured her. "And I have one more request. I'd like to stay in touch with Tyler to follow his progress. If you allow it, of course." Grandma Betty looked long at her grandson, then at Richard, as if measuring the sincerity in his eyes. "All I've ever wanted was to give him the opportunities his father never had," she said finally. "If you're truly committed—" "I am," Richard said with conviction. Shortly after, Richard found himself back in his Cadillac, driving back to his reality, but knowing nothing would be the same. As he passed through the gates of his luxury condominium, he felt strangely out of place, as if visiting a foreign country. The next morning, ignoring the dozens of messages and missed calls, he went straight to Riverside Mall. Nearby, a few people were still protesting, though the group was significantly smaller than the day before. In his office, he found the board of directors waiting for him, with expressions ranging from concern to irritation. "Finally!" Michael exclaimed, standing up. "We were about to call the police. What happened to you yesterday?" Richard placed his briefcase on the table and looked at each person present before answering. "What happened is that I opened my eyes, Michael." "What do you mean?" Edward asked, confused. "Sit down, please. We have a lot to discuss." During the next hour, Richard shared his experience, omitting personal details but making his change in perspective clear. He concluded by presenting a series of radical proposals: an inclusion and diversity program for the mall, opening stores with affordable prices, creating cultural spaces open to the community, and a new scholarship and mentorship program. Have. You lost your mind? Was Michael's immediate reaction. This goes against everything this company stands for. Our target audience is the elite, Richard. Always has been. Michael's face was red with indignation, his hands gesturing wildly as he paced back and forth across the room. We built this empire with sweat and strategy, he continued, pointing through the panoramic window at the city stretching below. William Dawson didn't create this legacy for you to turn it into a community center. Richard remained seated, watching his cousin with a calm that would have been impossible just days before. You talk about my father as if you knew him better than I did, he said, his voice quiet and controlled. But the truth, Michael, is that none of us really knew him. We know what he built, but not at what cost. He stood and walked to the window, standing beside his cousin. Last night I found something interesting in the company's old archives, he continued. Did you know that before building this mall, my father tried to negotiate with the residents of Hope Gardens? He offered apartments, schools, a smaller shopping center that would be managed by the community itself. Michael frowned, visibly confused. What are you talking about? I'm talking about a vision my father abandoned because his advisors— Richard paused meaningfully. Including your father, convinced him it was more profitable to simply remove those people, that our target audience wouldn't mix with the former residents, even in separate areas of the development. Michael's eyes widened slightly. That was 30 years ago. And we've been repeating the same mistakes ever since, Richard replied, turning to face the entire board. Exactly, he continued, his voice now firm and resolute. That's the point. We've built invisible walls around our developments. It's time to build bridges. The shareholders will— Kill us, Edward protested. The shareholders will thank us when they realize inclusion can also be profitable, Richard countered. Besides, the alternative is facing a PR crisis that could cost us far more in the long run. The discussion continued heatedly, with significant resistance from several directors. However, Richard stood firm, using not just emotional arguments, but also presenting financial projections and case studies of companies that had benefited from similar policies. Sarah, who had observed the meeting in silence, finally spoke up. I support Richard's vision. In fact, we already have a PR team working on a campaign that would align perfectly with these proposals. By the end of the meeting, though not everyone was convinced, Richard had secured enough support to begin his transformations. You're going to regret this, Richard, Michael warned as the directors filed out of the room. This mall was built for a specific audience. My uncle, your father, knew exactly what he was doing. Richard looked at his cousin, seeing in him the reflection of what he himself had been just days before. Maybe that's the problem, Michael. My father knew what he was doing when he removed entire families to build this place, when he created a space that excluded more than it included, and I upheld that vision for years, without question. Now, you've turned into some kind of social revolutionary, Michael sneered, because of some kid and an old seamstress? Richard took a deep breath, controlling his growing irritation. No, Michael, I've become a better person, and that, unfortunately, seems revolutionary these days. In the weeks that followed, Riverside Mall began a gradual but significant transformation. The change started behind the scenes, with a complete review of the employee conduct manual and a series of diversity and inclusion workshops for the entire staff. Richard personally attended the first training sessions with the security team, sharing his experience in Brownsville and setting new guidelines for interactions at the mall. Starting today, gentlemen, we don't judge customers by their appearance, he explained to the attentive team. Our job is to ensure everyone's safety, not to decide who does or doesn't belong here. The access policies were revised, eliminating hidden discriminatory practices that had become institutionalized over the years. An unspoken dress code that discouraged certain types of visitors was formally abolished. In the marketing department led by Rebecca, a new campaign took shape. Riverside Mall, a space for everyone. The first advertisements already reflected the shift, featuring models of different ethnicities, ages, and styles in everyday mall scenes. The most visible change, however, was the repurposing of an underused space on the third floor, over 5,000 square feet, into a community cultural center. The architectural design, developed by a renowned firm in collaboration with Tyler, incorporated elements reflecting the city's cultural diversity. The scholarship program, named the Robert Johnson Foundation in honor of Tyler's father, was launched with a quiet but moving ceremony. Tyler became the first recipient, enrolling in one of New York City's top schools, with a specialized curriculum in architecture and urban planning. 3 months later, Richard waited eagerly at the mall entrance. It was Saturday morning, and the place was still relatively empty. He smiled as he spotted Tyler and Grandma Betty approaching. "Right on time, as always," he remarked, echoing the words Grandma Betty had said on that transformative day. The older woman smiled, recognizing the reference. "Good morning, Mr. Harrison," Tyler greeted, now wearing his new school uniform, a brand-name backpack replacing the old cloth bag. "Good morning, architect," Richard replied, using the title he knew the boy loved. "Ready to see the construction progress?" Tyler nodded enthusiastically. Together they headed to the third floor, where the once empty space was being transformed, following, to Richard's pride, a collaborative design that incorporated many of Tyler's suggestions. "We still have a long way to go," Richard commented as they walked, "but we're on the right path." "You really have changed, haven't you?" Grandma Betty observed, her voice softer than usual. "This isn't just for good publicity." Richard shook his head. "No, Grandma Betty. That day in Brownsville, and it changed something in me. Something fundamental." When they reached the construction site, Tyler rushed ahead, eager to see how his ideas were coming to life. Richard and Grandma Betty watched from a distance. "You know, Mr. Harrison, when I demanded you spend a day with my grandson, I never imagined we'd end up here," the older woman confessed. "Neither did I," Richard admitted. "Maybe we all need more of these reality exchanges. Maybe the world would be better if everyone had the chance to see through someone else's eyes, even just for a day." Grandma Betty nodded thoughtfully. "You learned from Tyler, but did you know he also learned from you? Now he understands your world better. He told me he wants to build bridges between worlds, just like you're doing." Richard felt a lump in his throat. The word bridges had become something of a mantra for him over the past few months. The following Sunday, Riverside Mall would host an unprecedented event. The opening of a photo exhibition titled "Two Worlds, One City," depicting life in Brownsville and other outlying neighborhoods of New York City. It was the first of many initiatives planned for the new cultural center. Richard had personally invited several residents of Brownsville, including Ms. Thompson and Mr. Marcus from the hardware store. To his surprise and delight, many had confirmed their attendance. On the eve of the event, as he finalized preparations, Richard received a message from Tyler. A photo of the boy beside his new school model, far more elaborate than the previous one, but still holding the same vision of a transformed neighborhood. The caption simply read, "One day I'll build this for real. Thank you for believing in me." Richard felt tears welling up. He put his phone away and looked around at the mall he had inherited from his father, and was now reshaping in his own way. For so long he had seen it only as a commercial venture, a profit-making machine. Now he finally understood its potential as a meeting place, a space for change. On opening day, as he watched the unusual mix of visitors circulating through the exhibition, residents of Brownsville side by side with the mall's traditional clientele, Richard was approached by a reporter from Metro News. He recognized her immediately, Jennifer Wilson, the niece of Mrs. Grace, the woman who had recorded the video that set this entire journey in motion. "Mr. Harrison, few would believe the transformation we see here today, especially after the incident with Tyler. What sparked this change in you and Riverside Mall?" Richard smiled, scanning the crowd for Tyler, who was animatedly chatting with some visitors about his photographs in the exhibit. When their eyes met, they exchanged a knowing glance before he turned his attention back to the reporter. "I thought I was building spaces," he replied, repeating the phrase he had rehearsed in his mind many times since that day. "But Tyler taught me to build bridges." As the reporter continued with more questions, Richard reflected on the long road still ahead. Part of him remained the pragmatic businessman, concerned with results and profits. But another part, one he hadn't even known existed until recently, now understood that true success couldn't be measured by financial statements alone. Riverside Mall would still be a commercial venture, but now with a new mission: to be a space truly accessible to all, a meeting point between worlds that, though they coexisted in the same city, rarely touched. Amid the opening celebrations, Richard watched Grandma Betty chatting with Mrs. Grace, the woman who had recorded the video. Somehow these two elderly women from such different backgrounds had found common ground and seemed engrossed in lively conversation. That image, more than any other, captured the essence of what he now sought to build. That night, returning to his luxurious 18th-floor apartment in a building on the Upper West Side, Richard felt strangely out of place. He looked around at the 4,500 square feet of pure luxury, the designer furniture, the million-dollar artworks, the panoramic city views, and for the first time saw it all with new eyes. How many homes like Grandma Betty's could fit in this space? How many families could live comfortably on the value of just one of those paintings? He poured himself a whiskey and walked to his study. Sitting at his mahogany desk, he turned on his computer and found dozens of unread emails. One of them immediately caught his attention: the confirmation that the board of directors had finally approved the budget for the scholarship program. Starting next semester, 20 talented young people from underserved communities would receive the same opportunity as Tyler. The news filled him with a satisfaction he rarely felt in his professional achievements. It was something different, deeper, almost meaningful. He quickly scanned through the list of emails until he found another he'd been waiting for, a detailed report from the marketing team. Attached to the email was an extensive analysis showing that, contrary to all pessimistic forecasts, foot traffic at the mall had increased by an impressive 27% in recent weeks. The new inclusion policies, far from driving away traditional clientele, were attracting a diverse crowd and increasing the average time spent at the establishment from 1.2 to 1.8 hours. The report also included a sentiment analysis from social media, revealing a drastic shift in public perception of Riverside Mall. The hashtag #racist mall had gradually been replaced by Riverside for all, with digital influencers from various fields praising the implemented changes. The most surprising part, however, was the sales data. Stores that had initially threatened to break their contracts were now reporting significant revenue growth, especially those that had quickly embraced the new inclusion policy by offering products at more affordable price points without compromising quality. Richard smiled, leaning back in his chair. Maybe it was possible, after all, to do good and prosper at the same time. His father, with all his business acumen, had never understood that. Or perhaps he had at first, before being convinced otherwise by the businessmen of his time. He continued scrolling through his emails until he found one he hadn't expected, a message from his ex-wife, Elizabeth. They had divorced 3 years earlier, after 15 years of a marriage that had gradually turned into more of a convenient partnership than a loving relationship. The separation had been civil but distant, much like the marriage itself in its final years. "Richard, Brandon told me about the changes you're making at the mall and the boy you're helping. I was genuinely surprised and proud. Maybe we could grab coffee sometime. It'd be nice to catch up. Elizabeth." Those words touched him in an unexpected way. Elizabeth had always criticized his work obsession, his lack of empathy for the less privileged, his inability to see beyond the corporate world. She had been the one to say during their last big argument, "You built an empire, Richard, but you lost your humanity in the process." At the time, those words had infuriated him. Now, he recognized the truth in them. He thought of his son Brandon, who at 9 was already showing troubling signs of isolation and elitism, repeating phrases he heard from his father without understanding their meaning or impact. What kind of example was he setting for his own son? What kind of man would Brandon become if he followed in his footsteps? Before bed, he sent a message to Tyler. "Big day today. Keep dreaming big, architect. The world needs your bridges." The Yadai reply came almost immediately. You too, Mr. Richard. My grandma said you're different than she thought. She thinks you have a good heart, you just needed to find it. Good night." That simple comment from Grandma Betty, relayed through Tyler's innocence, moved him more than any recent professional achievement. It was as if, after years of navigating turbulent waters guided only by the compass of financial success, he had finally found a truer north. Before turning off his phone, he also replied to Elizabeth's email, "Coffee would be great. I have so much to tell and even more to listen to. How about Thursday, R?" Richard fell asleep with a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. Peace. That peace that came not from accumulating wealth or power, but from the awareness that for the first time in ages, he was on the right path. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to rebuild other bridges in his life, with his son, with Elizabeth, with himself. The next day, Richard arrived at the mall earlier than usual. He wanted to walk the halls before opening, to see the space with fresh eyes, to imagine the possibilities now unfolding. He was surprised to find some of the cleaning staff, people he realized with a twinge of shame he usually ignored completely. A middle-aged black woman was scrubbing the marble floor with impressive dedication. "Good morning," Richard greeted, stopping beside her. The woman looked up, clearly startled to be addressed by the mall's owner. Good morning, Mr. Harrison," she replied hesitantly. "Your name?" "Mary, sir. Mary Washington. I've worked here 12 years. 12 years. Over a decade keeping those floors spotless, and Richard had never noticed her existence. "It's a pleasure to meet you properly, Mrs. Washington. The mall wouldn't be the same without your hard work." The shy smile that lit up the woman's tired face was worth more than any positive financial report. Continuing on his way, he reached his office and found Sarah already waiting, her expression worried, a folder of documents in hand. "Good morning, Richard. Sleep well?" she asked, noticing something different in her boss's demeanor. "Better than I have in years, actually," he answered honestly. "Any problems?" Sarah hesitated, biting her lower lip lightly. "We have an issue. Richard. Michael has called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow. He's rallying support among the shareholders to block the next phases of the project and—" She paused, visibly uncomfortable. "There are rumors he's pushing to temporarily replace you as CEO, claiming you're emotionally compromised after the incident." Richard could have flown into a rage, as he would have in the past. Instead, he sat calmly, assessing the situation, with a clarity that even surprised him. "Who's on our side on the board?" "Rebecca, definitely. Edward seems inclined to support us after last week's positive numbers. The others are undecided or leaning toward Michael." Richard thought for a moment, drumming his fingers on the desk. "Call all the board members. I want to meet with them individually today before tomorrow's meeting, and schedule a visit to Brownsville for anyone willing to go. I want them to see with their own eyes what I saw." Sarah looked at him with admiration. "That's brilliant, Richard. But do you think they'll agree?" "Some will, some won't. What matters is offering the chance, and prepare a full report on all the positive results we've achieved, so far plus projections for the next 6 months. Richard nodded, not showing the concern he felt inside. He knew the resistance would continue. That change was never simple or straightforward. Michael represented the old way of thinking, the same way he himself had embraced until recently. "It's all right, Sarah. We'll handle this like everything else, step by step, building bridges where others want walls. And if I lose the chairmanship—" He smiled faintly. "Maybe that's exactly what I need to focus more on what truly matters now." As they walked through the now busier, more diverse halls of the mall, Richard reflected on how long and challenging this path would be. Even so, for the first time in his life, he felt truly in control of his destiny. Not because he held power or wealth, but because he had finally understood the real impact of his actions on the world. The boy he had once chased out of his mall with harsh words had ironically become his greatest teacher. And the most valuable lesson he had learned from Tyler wasn't about architecture or design, but about humanity. About how to see beyond appearances, beyond prejudices, beyond the invisible barriers that separated people who, deep down, shared the same dreams and aspirations. That morning, as he passed the exact spot where he had first met Tyler, Richard made a silent promise. He would keep building bridges no matter how many obstacles arose along the way, because now he knew that, in the end, we are all part of the same story. A story that, with small acts of courage and compassion, could have a much happier ending for everyone. End of story. Dear listener, this story reminds us that the greatest transformations begin with small acts of courage. Have you ever experienced a shift in perspective as powerful as Richard's? Share your experience in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories.